John, so we just had a wonderful chat in the church down in Bakewell, and we're now in this utterly beautiful space. I just wonder if you can tell us where it is, but also more importantly, what it is to you.
Well, it's really from the church. You just look across the valley, and you see woods on the hillside, and just beyond the horizon, and this you come to this wonderful open space. And I first came up here as a boy of 12, I think, soon after we moved to Bakewell. And I think it was up here that I really first fell in love with space. It was all open heathland then. It hadn't been ploughed up and reseeded as it is now. There were no fences. And there were lots of curlews and lapwings. And what a lovely place it was. And throughout my boyhood, in fact, ever since, I've been coming up here and always feeling better. Coming up from rather tense family situations, usually on my own. Yes, I discovered the great comfort of silence and space. I've always loved those qualities. It's never been difficult for me. I always feel it's my real home. And when I started thinking more in spiritual terms, I always felt this was my first church, really, up here. I was never too happy in a sort of social atmosphere of church services. Always felt closer to. I didn't really think in terms of meanings of things then. It was just a sort of natural boyish instinct, I suppose, to come up here. And here I am now as an old man, still doing the same thing.
And I guess when you're a boy, then this is an escape, right? And it's a space that isn't controlled by parents or.
Well, I suppose it was a escape then. I didn't suppose I thought of it like that, but of course, much later on, I came to see that there are really two great aspects to creation. There's the man-dominated creation, and what you could call the man-dominated or the unnatural creation, and the natural creation, where man is absent. And I suppose much of my life, because later on I travelled much. I've been in many of the wild, open and wonderful places of the world, and always loved that. Instinctively, I look at a map and I look where there are no roads and no towns. I think that's the place to go. And yes, always seeking the natural in contrast to the unnatural.
I mean, in the book, when I read the passage about Africa,
yes,
you basically went to Africa and went where people weren't.
That's right. Yes, I've always done that.
You talk about seeing an animal and learning about freedom. The freedom of these creatures helps restore one's own. Something disturbs them and they run, first a few, then all together, dust and hooves in perfect harmony. And this is an example, just the next passage in Glimpses of Africa, chapter 11. It lightens as I drive, revealing dunes unearthly beautiful, each form so clear in shades of orange sand, mountings of sand continuing in line, in wave on wave, huge dunes far greater than anything I've ever seen before. Words fail, but I think of desert prophets who first wrote of God, inspired by similar scenes, majesty, power, glory, might, and it's all here, so close to magnificence it merges into God. It's not belief, but fact.
Yes, that's right. It is. It's. I've never been too keen on belief, and people say you have to believe in God. Somehow it's never seemed very real to me. I've always thought of it as fact, as obvious, really. Africa was a wonderful opportunity to really be close to what I'm talking about. Absence of man and the pure, as it was in the beginning. I remember I thought this was how it was when God first made the creation, looked and saw that it was good. It hadn't somehow been corrupted by this influence of man. I think that's part of the magic of wild animals. When you see really wild animals in their wild setting, somehow you draw near to fairyland. All these fairies, angels, purity, it all begins to make sense. They come together and you understand, you suddenly realize this is what it is. This is what it is. And why can't we be like this? Why are we so condemned to live in exile from this? And this led me to think ever more seriously of what it is that's wrong with man. Just walking up here just now, as our feet trod on the grass, I remember one of the first great lessons when I was a farmer. Dad bought a few fields of grass when I came back from Australia when I was 21. And so I had my first fields, and I was so proud of them. I was like a dog with two tails. And then I realized that I couldn't walk across this grass that I loved so much with my big, of course they were hobnailed boots in those days we wore, without hurting the grass. What a lesson that was. I couldn't walk across the grass without hurting it, without bruising it. So here was I loving the grass, almost worshipping the grass, yet destroying it with every step, just as we did walking up here, just from the pathway. Of course, most people walk on grass, you don't think about it. You don't understand what you're doing because we're so blinded. We're present, but we're not present. We're absent, so we're insensitive to these things. And sometimes your understanding is open and you do feel it. And you then feel the really dreadful enormity of what I now realize Scripture calls sin. Sin is that which has absented us from spirit, which is God. The fairies can dance over the flowers, and sit on the flowers and don't hurt them, do they? They don't damage the grass. So why do we? Why can't we be like the fairies? Of course, in our true nature, our true spiritual nature, we are. In true spiritual nature, I can dance over these lovely pastures and not disturb anything. And here I am in my corrupt human nature, fallen, as it's described, fallen from paradise, and I can't take a step without hurting something. So that really led me on to think seriously about the human condition and what can we do about it. And that's, I suppose, been my life's work, trying to come back to spirit, rediscover and find a way back to being a spirit.
And and going right back to the beginning then, because one thing I wanted to ask you about was you write in the book about how your mum said that you always knew you were going to be a farmer.
Yes.
From before you were born.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, this also was a wonderful thing for me to realize that, yes, of course, at first I was a farmer in the physical world. I was a young, strong man working with my hands, with the soil, with forks and spades and things, digging the ground, growing vegetables, keeping sheep particularly. And then I began to write a bit, and people came, and most people laughed at me, of course, at that time, but a few people were interested. And encouraged me to talk, and gradually I was able to formulate my ideas. And so I sort of expanded from physical into, I suppose, mental. And then life moved on, and I began to look beyond my own few acres over the fence, to include my neighbours, and think wider and wider. And so my farm sort of expanded. But the same sense of there was a phrase came into use then. I knew the chap that invented it, a man called Schumacher, tender loving care, TLC, which I think summed up absolutely beautifully the whole sort of ethos of what was then began to be called organic farming, tender loving care. And this TLC, at least in my case, began to expand beyond the farm to the whole sort of human situation, to the whole world, really. And so it's with exactly the same attitude that farming for me simply expanded from growing a few vegetables on my own few acres to this spiritual work, which is raising the consciousness of on a universal scale. You see, if you think of it, you raise vegetables out of the earth, don't you? You help them to grow like that. And you encourage that growth by attending to the fertility of the ground. Well, the fertility of the ground is really the spirit of the ground. It's really the spiritual development of earth, which manifests as fertility. That's why the whole process of composting and encouraging the micro life of the soil, the worms, the bacteria, all the little bugs, they all help to build fertility, which produce healthy crops. I could talk forever about this. Oh, sorry, I'll go on and on. But you see, in exactly the same way, our own spiritual development helps raise the consciousness of the world in which we live. And this is the great work. In this fallen world that has fallen from paradise, restoring it to God. And this is, of course, we come on to the great work of prayer.
I wondered if it would be helpful if we just jumped over to South America and your experiences there and the frustration you seem to feel about helping others or making a difference.
Yes, that was an important time. I'd injured my back when I was 21, and I was told I'd have to give up farming, which broke my heart at the time, but I didn't, of course. I kept going. But it did mean I spent a few years in the family firm in Sheffield, but I really wasn't happy there, and I'd look out of the window and long to be outside. And it was the time when the world was beginning to take notice of what was then called the Third World. And Oxfam began about then, and there were pictures of little hungry kids in the papers, adverts. So I determined to go off to South America and help to make the world a better place. I was full of confidence. I felt I knew how to. Well, I was actually going to Bolivia to take. They were giving away 1,000 hectares of jungle, a virgin jungle, to any settler who'd go and clear the land and grow crops. I was going to do that, but I met a Peruvian girl, so I ended up in Peru. Yes, I got involved with the Andes are largely eroded there, and I knew a bit about soil erosion. I had seen it in Australia. And so I got involved with planting trees on the Andes to try to control erosion. And, I had some small success, but not very much. And one day I was sitting on a mountainside, and I seemed to hear a voice which said, "To make whole, be whole." And I saw myself as a rather immature young man with a lot of superficial knowledge, trying to help, in inverted commas, the local Indians, who were many of them much older and wiser than I was. And somebody sent me a book that mentioned meditation. And something began to work in me. I began to think I better do something to sort myself out before sorting the world out. So when my time in Peru ended, I came back and I looked for and found a school of meditation. And that's when the great adventure of meditation started. I was 26 years old. So that was what South America taught me, really.
But when I was reading the passage about when you were asked, there was a man who came along and said he wanted to kill you when you arrived.
Yes,
but by the end of it, he wanted you to stay. But you felt it was time to move on. And what it did seem like is that you had you'd facilitated the difference. Your presence had attracted others, and so there was a lot going on. But it wasn't necessary for you to be there anymore.
Well, who knows, Jonathan? Who knows? Who knows what seeds we sow? Yes, in a way, I seem to not achieve anything very much, but nothing much happens behind the scenes that we're not aware of. Yes, it wasn't when I first arrived already, but I'd moved to a new place, and one evening there were a lot of drunken Indians came and knocked me up and said they wanted to kill me. I was big and strong in those days. I didn't have much choice, did I? So I clenched my fists. Anyway, we settled down and started to talk, and they didn't kill me, but I wouldn't say we became friends, but at least we went our ways. And yes. Yes, often the great bullies of this life, when they settle down, and they often become the leaders, don't they? I don't think I've ever met a bad person in all my life. A lot of people, appear sort of unpleasant on first acquaintance, but when you get to know them, there's good in everyone. Everyone.
So you're back from South America, and you move and you start meditating at the School of Meditation.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you get and you had the farm in Bakewell?
Yes.
That time on the showground.
Yes. That must have been about the same time. Yes.
So at what point then did you move to Bicker Fen?
No. I had the farm. Dad bought the first fields when I was 21. Yes, that was earlier than that.
Right.
Anyway, yes. Well, it was a family affair. Things went wrong with the family business, and we had to. The family finances, of course, were shaken, and so we had to sell the farm. But at that time, there was a little cottage with just 3 acres of land that Dad's great aunt had lived in on the Lincolnshire Fens, and of course nobody thought of farming 3 acres. It was far too small. What can you do with that? But anyway, at that time I was going through a bit of a hermit phase. I was disillusioned with the world, and was ready to just retreat to a sort of solitary hermitage, and so I went to live there. And much to my amazement, on that fertile soil, you couldn't help just grow a few things. And I was going down to London to the School of Meditation there regularly. And one day I took a box of lettuce down, and to my amazement, at the end of the evening, I left it downstairs in a place where people went and had a cup of tea. And the box was empty, and there was a saucer full of coins. And I suddenly realized that there were people in the world who wanted produce grown as I wanted to grow it. Of course, I was the only countryman in the school. Everybody else were townies, but I'd talk, people were interested, and I'd talk about farming. And so they knew the way I thought about things. So I thought, well, good God, I could grow vegetables, couldn't I? So I started growing vegetables. Talk about life being unexpected, and so people started labeling me as one the first organic farmers. Well, I don't know about organic. I just thought of it as good farming, but I certainly loved the land. TLC, plenty of that.
Mm. So your approach then was really just this awareness that man damages.
Yes.
So it's got destructive power.
Yes.
And then we often ignore that, yes, and pretend that it doesn't happen.
Yes.
But then you got into the restoration or the creation of what sounded, and looking at the video as well that you've got on the website, and reading the other work, and in Wonders as well, is just how beautiful you made that.
Well, I think that sort of came out as a secondary effect, I think. I just love the earth. I really do. I love earth. Do you know, if you take a handful of earth and really look at it, you'll find it's one of the most beautiful things you could. There's no end to the wonder of earth. And once, even with your eyes, you can see this myriad of little creatures that create what's called a crumb structure. I remember once talking about the wonders of the structures of the earth to a very wise old lady. Lady Eve Balfour was one of the founders of the Soil Association. She said, yes, it's like a cathedral, isn't it? All turrets and passages and ups and downs. It's like a cathedral, and we should treat it as such. That's exactly right. And every little bacteria and bug you see that lives in the earth is a living creature. And if you put a great big clumsy foot on the earth, let alone a tractor or some heavy machine, you crush it, don't you? Mm. So it's like running a bulldozer over a cathedral. That's what we're doing to the earth. And this compaction of the soil, it squeezes the life out of the soil. It not only kills the little creatures, but it crushes the ventilation, it's like closing all the windows. You're crushing the roads. You're breaking all the structure of that enables life to take place. And it's absolutely almost unbelievable. The more you come to realize the destruction of man, how we can't really function without destroying. And this led me ever more deeply to consider, what is man? How do we get out of this mess? What's the answer? How can I learn to farm without destroying? Well, of course, we can't really, because we are in this physical body. I can't eat a lettuce without killing it, can I? Everything I eat, I'm killing. If I eat a potato, I'm killing it, alone anything that comes from animals. So here you come to understand that man is a sinner, until it became politically unacceptable, in modern fashions. People realized much better that man is absent from his truest state, which is in spirit. That's exactly what prayer is. Prayer is farming in spirit.
So I promise we're going to get back to that. Now that's part 2 of the book. I just want to hold your feet over the fire of the farming thing, because there's something. I think it's actually your wife told the story, and I've labelled it somewhere, and I've not actually. Let me just find exactly what the story is. It was a story that your wife told about. I think it was the chicks.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so here it is. So from the Parish Magazine in September '74. This is the item for the. So and the question is: so if we're a sinner, if we're sinners, then okay. So what can we do?
Yes.
Right, and if it's like, well, God plonked us on earth, you're a bunch of sinners, and it's like, okay, so now what? So what now do I do? Is there any redemption on earth? And here this is said at the beginning of August, one of our hens hatched 12 chicks from 12 eggs. She brooded in the hen house and in a day or two was ready to bring her family into the field. This meant walking down a ladder. I went to help and found 2 chicks still in the house. Inside the house, I picked one up and put it on the ladder and off it went. The last one was upset and when put on the ladder bounced back against my hand, wanting to come back into the house. I felt his tiny will pitted against mine and wondered what to do next. Then he heard the voice of his mother, gently and steadily calling. I felt the tension leave his body. He followed the call, ran down the ladder, and joined the family. When he followed his mother's voice, the chick's battle with me was over. His will, her will, and my will were united in one will. And then she says, this is just so beautiful. She says, perhaps our battles with husband, child, or neighbour can be dissolved by memory of our true direction towards truth, which is what we really seek. We may say, but how and where can I hear the voice of God? Well, isn't it singing all around us, all the time, waiting for us to listen, hear, and follow, even if the way seems new and strange?
Yes, absolutely. She was a smasher. My first wife, she understood these things, and we worked very well together on the farm. Yes.
And there's a moment in the film where you look at you both share a prayer and you say the prayer together, and then you look to each other,
yes.
And there's the look of such purpose and love in that film and in the look in your face, and I really got the sense that you were doing God's work.
The school where I learned meditation used to call it the third point, you see, because so often we live in this world of right or wrong, or this or that, or good and bad, you see, or you and me. This is relationship, you and me. But actually, if we just are silent, we just listen to the silence, just watch the way the grass is moving in the wind, how everything is actually happening in this invisible silence, which is spirit, which is God. And when we are in touch with this third point, you see, the seesaw of this world, what's called duality, this or that, the right or wrong, is held in balance. So everything becomes suddenly in order, in balance. And you begin to see what's meant by God's will.
And so if you were, and I really got the sense, and I think in the writing you can get it as well, that I mean, the land was already beautiful, right? Because it's Lincolnshire Fen,
yes.
And you made it when you can see the journey that you had, and the difference that you made by being so very patient and humble, and literally getting onto your knees, and doing the work, and honoring all creatures, and seeing what their will was, and at times shaping it, but also just and you were saying about how it's important is to listen. So you said that you listen to the plants and they tell you what to do.
Well, I hope it doesn't sound too silly, but yes, just be aware of them. I mean, look, when I just lower my eyes, look, there's a seeding dock just in front of me, just nodding in the wind. Well, I'm not doing anything to it, but I love it. I'm just looking at it, and in that look, there's love and almost worship, isn't there? It's almost unbelievably beautiful. If you just look at anything, it is, isn't it? Whatever we look at is beautiful if you look at it. If you even just hold up a pencil or something, or look at my fingernail, it's absolutely miraculous, isn't it? Who could ever have dreamed anything so wonderful as a hand could exist? This dear old hand of mine for 84 years has done things, and I've hardly noticed it. Talk about a good servant. And this grass. honestly, we live in a world of, if we really saw what's in front of us, I think we'd just burst because it's too wonderful for us to contain.
You looked like you were going to burst on the farm in that film. There were moments when you were just overflowing, and yet also, I mean, Shirley said how you were, and you were saying you could be a bit brutish. You were, when she arrived, you've been 5 years on your Todd, growing vegetables, and you found it difficult to speak.
Yes, I've never found it. You think I'm gambling away now, but actually, I'm much more naturally silent.
I think, and I was thinking, John never talk. He doesn't really talk about angels, and given that he's so, he has such experience, and I'm thinking, well, bloody Shirley, putting up with that.
You're putting up with this, exactly.
Poor Shirley.
Poor Shirley.
She was you were there tending to the flocks, and she was there tending to you, wasn't she? Drawing you back out of yourself.
Try.
Just wondrous. Just absolutely wonderful. And, and there's a story now that's quite famous around you now, which is the story of Piglet, of how you had a pig for a pet.
Yeah.
It was an orphan piglet, and then you raised him on his own, and then you killed him.
Yes.
And then you ate him.
Yes. Pigs get bigger. This is what happens with a pig. It starts off with a little cuddly piglet, but you've got to feed it, haven't you? Well, and the more food you put into it, the bigger it gets. And eventually, it's so big, it takes over the whole place.
But, I've got a friend who's running that experiment right now. Her husband bought her what was called, at the time, a micro pig. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No.
So, and that's because they don't exist. Right, what it was a baby pig.
Yes.
So someone had some clever marketing idea. It's like, I want to sell some piglets. So he described them as micro pigs, and he said, "Oh no, they just grow to be the size of a dog," and they didn't at all. They grew to be they were normal pigs, and so this pig kept growing, and they've had to move house. And and it got to the stage one point where the pig became territorial because they're super smart animals, right?
Yes.
Rachel came home one day and she said, "I think we've been burgled." And because the house has always been wrecked, and when they played back the video on the security cameras, the pig had managed to work out how to use a door and managed to make his way around the house, and also it became really rather possessive of her, so wouldn't let the husband in the house, and so they had to so they moved house, and now they live next door to a field where the pig is basking in this piggy glory. They can't bring themselves to eat it. But the thing that I really took from that was how it was the love. And he said Pig and I had loved each other in life and death, and at least I felt the bond continued. It was an important lesson. Somehow it seemed to me my piglet never died.
Yes.
Because you actually, the love is, you said the love with which we work is not lost but recycled.
Yes, exactly.
And the value of the food we eat is most certainly connected with the quality of man and conditions which produce it.
Absolutely, amen to that. It's amazing that I wrote that. I wrote that when I was, how old was I? Maybe 30, I don't know, long time ago. It's amazing, isn't it, what I knew? He's absolutely right. Yes, I took, this was dead serious. This was a huge lesson for me. And I ate that whole pig. It was a big pig. A pig's about 90% fat. But that was what everybody ate in the old days, fat bacon. It was salted and it kept. We hung it from a cellar in our house. And it took me 3.5 years to eat that pig. I ate every morsel of it. And of course, at the end, it was all festooned with green mold, but only on the outside. Inside, but it did begin to get a bit strong. But anyway, I ate it. It didn't do me any harm. And honestly, who would want to go out and buy meat after that? Because it's absolutely true that love with which I love, I think the pig loved me. We both loved each other, and that came back to me. I ate that meat with reverence, and of course that led me on to realise that the vegetables that I was growing then, if I put love into my work, that love becomes part of the vegetable, therefore part of the nourishment. Therefore, I'm nourishing the consumer in that way. And honestly, if you eat like a birthday cake cooked by your mother with loving care, isn't that different from just going out and buying a cake in the supermarket?
Oh, 100%.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. Well, so it is with farming. If every potato we ate was grown with TLC, every grain of wheat was grown in that way, think how the whole society would be nourished. Isn't this the real work of a farmer to first of all cultivate this spiritual awareness in himself and put that into his work, hence it flows out.
Yeah.
Prayer is this raising of consciousness, this raising of the finer qualities of life.
Oh, and you know, and I just think, and when I was thinking, I went in the, in the emails you're saying how you're not farming anymore and stuff. It's like, well, you just haven't stopped. You've just got, and I know at the end of the book you talk about being a farmer to others.
Yes.
And I just think that the lessons that I take is working in business. The lesson I take, one of the biggest ones was follow your love, because that you loved farming and you loved animals and also be open, because I think Shirley brought more animals to the farm, didn't she? Her impact was
well, because there were two of us, we could keep more.
Brilliant. And it's that, and so find something that you love, but also that what you did to make that how you wanted to work. You made they made the economics fit around that to some extent. I know you could have been a lot richer with more acreage, farms, machinery, chemicals, and stuff like that. But then it would have impoverished you in a different way. So you found a way of making the economics work for you.
Dear, yes, and I suppose economics had been invented a long time ago, but of course this economics, like science, these things are quite new phenomena, really. Farming used to be a way of life. Nobody thought of it as a business. And then it became gradually more and more of a business. And then science came along and became agro-business. And economics came in and people started costing everything. And all this seemed ever more alien to me and the opposite to my better instincts. And I had a very good father, really. In some ways he was very strict. I was a bit frightened of him, really. But he was an artist and he had a good understanding. I remember once I talking to him and worried that I couldn't make farming pay. And forgive me for saying this because I'm going to swear, but he said, "Bugger the money." Bless his heart. Yeah. I think that was the one of the... I'll always bless him for saying that to me. Bugger the money. And I couldn't think of a better principle to live by. Follow your heart. Follow your heart, my dears.
But and I just think the way that you and Shirley treated weeds.
Yes.
Right. So if managers and leaders treated their people the way that you and Shirley treated weeds, we would not have trouble in the workplace.
Oh, of course,
because there was love in everything you did, and going back to the if you're going to eat lettuce, then honour the lettuce, grow it beautifully, grow it caringly, and honour the lettuce as you eat it, because the sacrifice is willing. Yes. From what I took from your writings, is that they're happy for that sacrifice. Just honour it.
Well, it's not much use expecting our leaders. You see, it's got to start with me. It all starts with me. I am the first of sinners. I am the one at fault. So start clearing up our own act, my own act. And then you see when, as it says in the good book, to the pure all things are pure, you see. And the more light you have in your own life, the less darkness you see. It's as simple as that. And when you really see clearly, there is no more darkness. I assure you, the darkness ceases to exist, just like the sun sees no shadow. So it all starts with me. See, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and so is evil.
But what so when you talk about being a sinner, I can look at how people talk about being a consumer as the same thing, because all you do is take. And I know what you were talking about. You talk about natural law in the book about first give. If you want to produce, first give, and the way that you gave to the soil and nurtured the soil.
That's right.
And the other key principle is that you acted in a way that made next year better. That next year's harvest was going to be better because you honoured the soil this year, and you cared for it in a way that restored the soil and kept it strong. I'm just wondering what your take is of as we are as sinners, is what do you take of us being made in God's image?
Right here and now. If we're just talking and are still, here is the silence. Just to be silent. We can feel our bottom sitting on this bench. The bench is rather hard, and I'm beginning to feel the bones of my bottom getting a bit uncomfortable. Our feet are on the ground. And up to now, my tongue's been rattling away. But now it's become quiet. This silence has moved into first place, hasn't it? Suddenly become the most apparent. You can't call it a thing, can you? But it's become obvious, hasn't it? Somehow the performance has merged into the scenery, as it were. First of all, this lovely grass, the sunshine behind us, and then expanding into the silence, the space. The spirit. Now what am I? Am I this body fidgeting around on this hard bench? This voice? Haven't I merged into this infinite spirit? Haven't I left the body behind? Forgotten about it almost. And just expanded into this infinite spirit. And here are you and I sitting on this bench talking as two men. But actually, how many spirits are there? Have you got one and me another? And that fly buzzing around on the camera? Or is there just one spirit containing us all? One infinite silence, infinite presence, infinite spirit. So what are we? What is man? Are we not this spirit? This one spirit? That incidentally can move around without crushing the grass? Isn't this what we are? This doesn't die, does it? It doesn't change. And it's forever with us. I am with you always. See, long before we fell into I am John and you are Jonathan, two separate men, two separate lives, we are one spirit. Beyond time or space, without age or difference, in the image of God. Remember, Adam in the Garden of Eden was singular, just one, wasn't he? One. Before he fell into division. And so, because he fell from immortality, he fell into mortality and infected the whole world with his disease. That's why everything in this world dies. Because in the real world, no such thing as death, is there? So we need to understand what we're talking about. Are we talking about real man as he truly is, made in the image of God? Amen to that. Or are we talking about fallen man who dies? Mortality. See, humanity is, look, there's a grasshopper on the tripod there. Just see just how it just flew there. You see, mortality, humanity is really a disease. It's not what man is. It's absence from the presence of God. So all the misfortunes of this life are basically that.